Okay. Is everybody ready to get started? Thank you for coming tonight. We're going to start with brief introductions, just in case you were here for bingo night. It's not tonight. Tonight is Act 46. And I'll preface by saying this is meant to be a working session. This is not the end-all, be-all on Act 46 in general or how it pertains to Dorset. But we thought this was a good opportunity for the members of the Merger Study Committee, or some of the members, to bring Dorset and broader community up to date on where we are. So we'll just start with quick introductions in alphabetical order, I guess, with Richard.
Oh.
Tell us about yourself.
Okay. Richard Grip. I'm a relatively new member to the Dorset community. I'd say about 4 years now. Moved over here to take great advantage of Burr and Burton for my kids in high school, and I did have a daughter that attended Dorset School here for 2 years. By trade, I'm an educational consultant actually in this kind of field, more or less. I'm doing feasibility studies for school districts that are interested in merging or in some cases deregionalizing or terminating sending receiving agreements. That's part of my work, and I'm a demographer as well, looking at enrollment projections. So in this capacity, I serve as the vice chair of the merger committee, and we've been working on topics since May.
I'm Elizabeth Corrett. I've been here live in East Dorset. I've been here for about 9 years, although I did grow up in Dorset proper when I was little, till about I was 6 or 7. So I did go to the Dorset School when it was where the post office was, the 2-room schoolhouse. But I've retired back up here, and I was involved in education in New Jersey, working in the business office, not as a teacher or school administrator, but in the business office. And I've always been interested in education, and I just wanted to be part of this committee so that we can decide what we want to do and not have somebody else tell us what to do.
I'm Jim Miranda. If you haven't seen me in a while, I am Jim Miranda, growing a beard. I have 3 children at the Dorset School. I have an 8th grader, I have a 5th grader, and I have a kindergartner. And the 5th grader and the 8th graders did start here in kindergarten. We live in East Dorset, and I'm also a Dorset School Board member.
I'm John Wilson. I'm from Manchester. I'm the chair of the committee, and I grew up in Manchester, went to MEMS, BBA. I'm a teacher at BBA currently, and I have some kids at MEMS now. And I'm here tonight just to provide support and not to speak to Dorset concerns. And you guys have pretty lucky. You got 3 pretty thoughtful committee members and well-versed committee members representing you on the committee.
So we have a short presentation. It's about a dozen slides. And what we'll do is we'll go through the information on each slide, and we'll pause, and we'll either, these folks will either correct me if I said something wrong or add some additional comments. And if you have questions or comments about the topic on that slide, feel free to bring them forward, and then we'll most likely have a little bit of time at the end. We carved out 2 hours. We're welcome to stay that long, but I don't think presentation is going to take anywhere near that long. Okay, our objectives tonight are to take a step back and just review some of the basic aspects of Act 46. We had a pretty large forum when Act 46 came out just about a year ago. So it had come out in the spring of 2015. The Dorset School Board hosted a forum here to give maybe a little bit more technical background on Act 46 and how it came about, what some of the options were. Tonight we wanted to bring you up to date on what the Merger Committee has been doing, and we want to get some feedback from you on some of the, obviously, the elements of the plan. Here's our disclaimers. We did not write Act 46. We're not the legal experts on Act 46. We will have bigger forums this winter. We will have our consultant. We will have experts who have, in some cases, better or more complete answers than we have for you tonight. And importantly, we're not here to sell you on Act 46. We all came into the Act 46 Merger Study Committee with objective minds and trying to stay open to to the technical issues that we were going to look at. So we're not here to sell you on this. Ultimately, the taxpayers of each district are going to vote for or against a merger. I'll get into the details about that in a minute. So we're asking for constructive feedback on the information that we're giving you, and we're asking what information do you need as we move forward in this process through the winter and the early spring to perhaps make an informed decision on Act 46. We're okay with that. Okay. So what's the Merger Study Committee? It's a distinct legal entity. It is not part of any other school boards. It's not part of a state board or an SU. It has 17 appointed representatives, and obviously 4 of us here are all part of this Merger Study Committee. The Dorset School Board appointed us 3 representatives, Richard, Elizabeth, and I being representative from the Dorset School Board. So we're a small part of a bigger community and a bigger committee. And I'll tell you the other towns that are, make up that representation in a minute. We're charged, we have real 3 key points, is studying the aspects of a potential merger. There's a lot of technical details that are going into this. We need to answer a very big question. Is it advisable to merge? We have not run into any significant roadblocks with the districts that we're talking to in a possible merger. We still need to technically vote on this question. And we're probably going to vote on this question in November. If we vote that it is advisable to merge, that there's no technical difficulties, there's no technical reasons why we shouldn't merge, then it would go to the voters. And I'll get into the details of that in a little bit. We're also charged with writing a report to the State Board of Ed and writing articles of agreement. The articles of agreement would be the bylaws for a new merged district. Okay, this is really important. It's the voters of the current school districts in this merger who would vote for or against the merger. It's not the Merger Study Committee, even though we have to answer this question, is it advisable to merge? It's the voters of the community, not the study committee and not the school boards that are going to be voting as to whether a merger moves forward or not. So technically, voters will be voting on the articles of agreement. It won't just be, are you for or against the merger? It'll be, here are the articles, here are the bylaws. Do you support this or do you not support this? Oh, sorry. Does anybody have any questions on anything I've just presented in this slide? Or does anybody want to correct me?
Can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
absolutely.
And I'm sorry if I'm behind the curve on this, but so the Merger Study Committee is a distinct legal entity, 17 appointed representatives, so 3 from the Dorset School Board, and I'm presuming the other 14 are from other school boards?
Yeah, and I'll
School
call
districts, not
Not
boards.
school
And
boards.
the school districts? Yeah.
school districts, I'm sorry, yeah. And I'll summarize, who is in that and, what other towns are in that, and we'll look at the big picture.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Let's just go to some quick basics on Act 46. It's a school district consolidation law that was passed in the spring of 2015. It has 5 key components. Probably the 3 biggest are focusing on education equity, education quality, and education costs. It's doing this through school governance change. This is not a financial law like some previous ones were in regards to trying to adapt schools. This law has a little bit more teeth in it than other, what we would say, were more voluntary consolidation laws. Act 153 was a law that came out in 2010, asking all districts around the state, again, to look at going forward with voluntary mergers. There was only one that I know of, and that's the mountain towns who are part of this working committee. What are the incentives? There's financial carrots and sticks, along with definitive timelines to encourage school district consolidation. I put encourage in bold because I think it's still a little debatable. Do we have to do this? We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. There's going to be other times where we'll be able to talk about that in more detail. But really, this is the state encouraging districts to meet with their neighbors and see if mergers are possible. The state desires sustainable governance structures. This terminology is really put throughout Act 46. Unfortunately, there's no definition of what the state considers sustainable governance structures. So I can only assume that they think we are unsustainable at the moment. And maybe that's fair based on the population decline of school-age children in the state. One main goal we know through reading Act 46 is a higher student-to-teacher ratio in every district. And this is an interesting point, and again, something we're going to have to talk more about tonight and in the future, is that the state decides the fate of districts who don't merge by 2019. I don't have a clear answer for you on what that means, however, at this point. Does it mean that they can force us to merge with other districts? Possibly. Again, I'm not a legal expert. I can't say that I read it as that black and white right now. But there's a lot up there. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Sorry.
That's okay.
I hope these aren't things that
No.
everyone else already knows. So for Act 46, it's actually a voluntary thing. They're not saying that right now they're going to force mergers. They're saying that we're suggesting that you merge.
Strongly suggesting,
If not, maybe something's going to happen.
with financial incentives, if there is no merger plan put in place by November of 2017, then there is more answers that we have to provide to the State Board of Ed. In 2018, 2019, the State Board of Ed would need to develop a plan for districts who have not merged with their thoughts on what are the next steps. And again, our merger committee has really been talking about the details of how to bring a potential merger plan together, not the what if we don't scenario. And again, we realize we should, this winter we'll probably get into that detail. The Dorset School Board will probably be looking at that to give residents some guidance. But I don't have a clear answer today on exactly what that means,
Okay. And does Act 46 also designate which areas and which schools are supposedly thinking of merging
That's
together?
fine. Crack that.
How is that determined?
No, it's
Not
What was
really.
the
Yeah.
question? I'm sorry.
just
How
not the
does
law.
Act 46 designate which areas? In other words, we've got a whole state with schools all over the place. How are they deciding which schools are supposed to think of voluntarily merging with others? Is it designated which areas?
No,
No.
we don't. That's right. It's the metaphor, the best metaphor that's been used so far, the popular one is dance partners, right? So how do you find the dance partners? And you have to have the same enrollment option or choice option as the districts you're going to merge with. Okay, so Manchester, Dorset, Mountain Towns Red, they all have the same choice option. That's 9 through 12 choice. The thinking is, the interpretation is from the state that if you have different enrollment options in the same district, that violates the Common Benefits Clause of the state constitution. And so, that's the interpretation, the prominent interpretation. And so, for example, Sunderland and Danby and Mount Tabor, who have 7 through 12 choice, if they were to merge, according to the current trajectory, they would need to give up their 7th and 8th grade choice. And so your choice enrollment, is one, especially in the southern part of the state with a diversity of enrollment options, choice options,
Right.
that really kind of, that's who you can dance with. That determines your dance partner.
So they have not told Dorset, for instance, that you have to go talk to these other partners. But they ask for you to look in a geographic area and not isolate towns, specifically smaller towns. And also they want you to start by looking within your SU, your supervisory union. I'll talk about what that is in just a minute. So there is some guidance, but to answer your specific question, no, they didn't tell us specifically, who you're going to merge with. Now, there's a risk that if we didn't do anything, that they might go ahead and do that. But nothing that I read at this point in time frame in Act 46 says that.
I just want to add that talking about some of the merger study committees that we've encountered around the state, there's many of these things going on. This is not just unique to this area. Many of them actually have folded. They have just disintegrated. And now you've got districts that have nowhere to go at this point in time. They may have to actually start negotiating with other dance partners. I kind of like that term because that's the way it really is. So some of them may actually have their first choice doesn't work out. Then they have another opportunity where they'll start working with another district. And we are seeing that even some local districts not too far here. We've had some contact with Paulett and Rupert and Wells, and their committee broke apart. You're probably aware of that. So it does happen.
I'm just wondering, it says there that the goal is higher students to teacher ratio. Have you set any guidelines, or what's that target?
I have not read any targets or guidelines in Act 46 other than, I can show you at the end of the presentation, a couple extra slides that actually have that verbiage in there. Does anybody else?
Nothing in the
Seen
law.
that?
I think what's going to happen probably is then when the new school board is elected, if we were to merge, that would probably be part of their policy at that point in time.
I have read, if you don't have a plan in place and you have to go through this longer explanation or justification on where you are at the end of 2017, I believe it does ask specifically, for the districts to answer that question. How are you going to address that? That's what I've read. Again, I'm not a legal expert on Act 46, but I do see that in the law. But I don't see any specific targets.
Numbers, yeah.
I have one question. I was reading the memo that Dan got back from the Agency of Education clarifying some things when he was looking at different ratios that would make up the new school board. And I noticed at the end of that it said something about that they had the right in the law to put districts together, merge districts together. And then it also mentioned Arlington earlier in that memo. They're a K-12 district.
Yeah.
What would that mean?
That memo might have been in regards to the supervisory union, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The first part of what you were talking about was, again, back to this question is, can they merge districts? I'm asking for some interpretation of that law. I've gotten a little bit. I'm not ready to say exactly what it is, but it seems to be the sentiment that if you don't do anything, the state could merge you with somebody else.
But if you did act and they approved it.
Right, then you get to set your course.
Right.
But you cannot, they cannot make you change your choice option.
Right.
Right, so that's
Yeah, that's a good
so
clarification of
they
our question.
can't make Arlington.
Right. I'll
go
talk
with
about the
those,
supervisory union in another slide or two, though.
Okay.
And just one more question, and I know you didn't write Act 46, but you've obviously probably looked into it more than I have at this point. It says here that it's focusing on education, equity, quality, and costs, but in fact, obviously the impetus of this must be financial, just as Act 60 was, and everything else. I mean, is that really true? This has to be financial. That's the idea. I mean, that's the only reason why you would have schools merge. I mean, you're not talking about our kids testing. They're talking about finances and the VRSUs. So is that really accurate?
I'm not going to argue with your interpretation of that. Those words are in the law,
Okay.
but I see your point.
Just one thought. I think it's important to kind of, we look at it from the perspective of our system, our local educational system, and I think we may not be totally representative of what's going on around the state. I think some of the issues they're trying to deal with probably are greater issues in other locations. So you kind of have to keep that in mind that this is, one of the negatives with Act 46 is, even though they're saying at the local level you guys figure it out, it's still the basic ground rules are set on a statewide basis. Same set of rules for everybody.
They
So
do.
if I'm saying like equity, I think cost definitely drove them a lot, but I think equity is an issue of great interest to the folks up there, and the feeling that there isn't equity all around the state still. I think there's something behind the claim of, trying to get greater equity. Whether this is the solution for that or not, that's may not have been clear.
So maybe Act 60 didn't work as well as it should.
Well, this is not a Dorset School Board meeting, but I think we've had more exposure to these issues than the general group has. And one of the things that when they say equity, it's not about money, it's about opportunity and access to resources, whether that be teachers, materials, computers, programs. And so equity has kind of a different definition. We've already equalized spending across the state.
Right.
So now what they're saying, although I think that was kind of the icing on the bitter pill of the financial aspect, was that, oh, really, this is about equity and equity of opportunity. So it's kind of, that came with the second phase of this conversation a year after Act 46 was really.
And examples that I've heard are, if you're in a small high school of less than 100 students versus one that's much bigger, can you prove to the state that you're able to provide that level of equity and quality that maybe a bigger school can? Those are the type of examples I've heard in reference to that specific point. Anybody else?
Jim, has the state said whether they intend to penalize any of the districts, like through taxes or anything, or just force our hand?
That's a great question, one that I'm trying to get some clarity on as we speak.
Couldn't hear the question.
She's asking, are there tax penalties? Jim, can you answer that? Because you got.
Jim's looking at me because I've been in touch with the Vermont School Boards Association, asking questions on a couple of these issues and what the interpretation is. And there's an element in the law about a tax penalty that's the answer that I've received back, and I took a close look at it. There is a 5% penalty. I think that had more to do with Act 153 provisions requiring people to centralize services. It's not really meant to be. What I've been told is it's not intended to be an Act 46. If you don't merge, then we'll throw extra taxes on you. But
We're trying to get more clarity on it. It doesn't appear that there is at this point, but there are certainly financial incentives that are available if you merge, and if you don't, you lose those incentives. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. So hopefully this is meant to be a little bit fun, but also serious, that there's been a lot of consolidation in the history of Vermont. So let me just take you through this fairly quickly. The 1800s, most towns operated numerous schools and numerous districts. And I guess I've read there's points where there were several districts inside of one school, which I never knew. In the late 1800s, the state was looking at over 2,500 individual school districts and said, we need to consolidate. And they brought us down through law to 300, which is roughly where we are now. We also had the creation of supervisory unions in the late 1800s. I've been told this is unique to only a few states in the country. We still operate under a supervisory union structure. It's an administrative unit. I'll talk about our supervisory structure in another slide or two. We had as many as 14 school districts in Dorset in the 1800s. In 1958, we unified the final two schools and built the Dorset School. In 1960, and I read we had 187 students. It's almost exactly the number of students we have in the school now. Was anybody here when we did that? Elizabeth?
No?
I thought you said you went to school in
Well,
the
yeah, but back in the 40s.
Okay, well,
Yeah. I went to I think there's a thing at the Historical Society.
Yeah.
There were 9 schools in Dorset.
14.
That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
9 at one operating concurrently.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the Historical Society has a map that maps out all the schools, which is actually very interesting. So beyond union high schools merging in the state, most districts have not gone forward with any voluntary mergers until Act 46. I did mention the mountain towns, which is Weston, Peru, Londonderry, and Landgrove. They did form what's called the Mountain Towns Red. They operate the Floodbrook School. But in the last year, about 50 districts have actually agreed to consolidate or are in the process of consolidating. And so today in Vermont, about 87,000 students, somewhere around 250 to 300 schools, over 300 school districts, 28 supervisory union. I can only guess when the state looks at those figures, they say that's not a sustainable governance structure. Let me tell you, just to bring you up to date on what the Dorset School District looks like now, because Act 46 is talking about changing the school district. So we mimic the town district. If you're a taxpayer in the town, you're a voting member of the Dorset School District. We have a 5-member elected board. 4 of us are here tonight. We have a budget of about $6 million. We have just under 300 students. We have 100 students that go to high school, and we have about 182 students in this building. So don't forget about the high school students when we talk about the size of our district. It's not just the students who are in the school. We're part of the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union. We call that the BRSU, or sometimes the SU. That's run by a separate appointed board. Those appointees come from the member school districts, and that's run by a superintendent. Currently that's Jackie Wilson, formerly that was Dan French. That person is the CEO of every school district in the supervisory union. And I'll show you another slide exactly what that supervisory union looks like. The supervisory union shares many administrative functions: accounting, student record keeping, important things like curriculum development, managing special education, transportation. Jim Salzger, who's in the audience, is the chairman of the BRSU currently. It's a well-functioning group. It's possible that supervisory union can change, within this district consolidation. In the BRSU right now is Dorset, Manchester, the mountain towns again, Landgrove, Peru, Weston, and Londonderry. Also Sunderland, Courier, which is Danby and Mount Tabor. And I say also Medowee and Winhall because the first group is the group we're currently talking about possibly merging with. But we also have Medowee and Winhall. They're structured differently than us. Medowee is a K through 6 school that designates high school over in New York. So we couldn't really be talking about merging with them. Winhall is a non-operating district. They tuition K through 12 for all their students. So that's what the Dorset School District looks like today. Does anybody have questions about just Dorset School District now? Anybody want to? Okay, so let's get into a little bit more detail about what's proposed under a merger. John talked about dance partners. So we are talking to similar districts right now, are all in the districts in our SU about becoming one school district. When you break it down, it's really 9 towns that are part of this merger study committee, each with representatives. Dorset, Manchester, again, the mountain towns, Landgrove, Londonderry, Weston, and Peru, Danby, Mount Tabor, and Sunderland. The merger study committee is talking about forming a single school district with all of those 9 towns. Okay? We don't all currently share exact similar structure, but Dorset, Manchester, and the mountain towns all operate a K through 8 school. Danby and Mount Tabor operate the Courier School, which is K through 6, and Sunderland, which is also K through 6. So what we're talking about is bringing all the towns together into one single district. One school board. Everybody in the 9 towns would vote for that school board representatives. One budget. Everybody in all 9 towns would vote on that budget. That new district would operate the current 5 schools. Okay? Some of them are K through 6. Some, like Dorset School, are K through 8. I threw a little pre-K in there because some schools do pre-K. Doesn't necessarily fall into Act 46, but the potential new school board would look at that. And I threw up a question mark because it's very possible if these districts came together that there might be some rearrangement of how these schools operate.
You have a question?
Yeah, but
Jim, right now we have school boards for each of our schools.
Right.
We also have a supervisory union.
right.
So under this structure, it would be one entity as a board that would replace the supervisory union and the individual school board?
It wouldn't. We're not headed in that direction. I'll show you visually what that's going to look like in the next slide, so that the supervisory union would still stay in place. This last point is important. If these towns, these 9 towns merged into one school district, we would tuition all 9 through 12 students. So for Dorset residents, nothing would change in your opportunities to send students to BBA or Long Trail or other schools. Justine?
Hi, so, question, the schools that have K-6,
Right.
would the 7th and 8th grade children then be bused to here, or?
It's a great question. Can I hold off for 3 slides and I'll get to that? Does anybody else have anything they want to?
No, that's
Okay. Everybody good? All right. That's a lot. That's a lot to digest. And I have to say, bringing 9 towns together into one school district is a big effort. Lisa?
Jim, do you have a budget or cost for what it, because I was following a lot of these
Right.
districts that actually got very close to merging.
Right.
And then the dance cards fell apart.
Right.
And they had like, YouTube videos that walked you through step by step, very informative, but it all comes at a cost. So like,
Right.
have districts lost money just because they sent it to the state rejected it, and it was just like, okay, find a new dance partner. Were there legal costs and that were draining the
Can you
district?
talk about that, John?
Yeah, when you enter into study committee, the 706 process, you're given a grant from the state. I believe it's $20,000. You have to use that to hire a consultant, essentially, or the SU will be your fiscal, will handle your operations, financial operations, but you get money for that.
Okay, so that it's all being funded through grants?
Yes.
So if you make a mistake?
Yeah, it's not coming out of we're not paying for it.
Comes out of the state's
Directly out
pocket.
of our school budget.
Why you need to, why you would rush into something.
Right. Right.
Does the grant money come from the education fund?
It's a good question. I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I would think it does, because lots of things come from the education fund. Do you know the answer?
I don't know the answer. Right.
Jim?
Yeah, which is why I said we don't directly pay for it, but it's possible we are indirectly paying for it.
We should probably,
Anybody else know?
I think it is from there.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I agree with, this is definitely equity driven by the state. And I agree with you. They are concerned that it's unsustainable. The current system is unsustainable.
Those were my
for the
words,
long
but-
term.
okay.
Oh, those weren't your words? Okay. Well, that's my interpretation.
Okay.
So if
Yeah.
this is equity driven and districts are losing money trying to piece together this puzzle, that doesn't seem fair to the districts either, that the state is getting its burden.
I think I'm going to have to speak louder.
So
Or you guys have to
question.
show.
You can't hear the question over
Okay.
It needs to be repeated. Person needs to say.
Okay, I'll do that. Can I move on from here? Does anybody have any other questions about this information? So, can everybody see the details here? Okay. So I mentioned we operate in a supervisory union structure. So focus on the blue towns and school districts. Again, we're talking about 9 towns. We're currently represented in 5 districts that operate schools. There's actually, Courier, for instance, is technically 3 districts right now, but they operate together to operate the Courier School. Again, we also have Meadowy and Winhall within our supervisory union structure. So there's just 2 slides. I'm going to toggle back and forth here, just so you can visually see what we're talking about. So we're talking about moving these 9 towns together into one school district, and that school district staying inside of the supervisory union. We have a tentative name. Taconic and Green School District. But again, you know, that big district sitting inside of a bigger supervisory union is the direction that we are proposing. We clarify a couple other things. Again, this is where we are. This is a potential structure. The state actually decides the structure of every supervisory union. We can suggest what partners we want to have within the supervisory union, but we don't have the final say. So there's a question in the back as to whether we could, you know, be our own supervisory union. It doesn't appear that we are going to be able to go forth with that alternative. And I don't want to get into too much details about it now. But again, the point is, bigger school district inside of a supervisory union. The question mark down at the bottom, again, is we don't know exactly who's going to be within our supervisory union. Now, these districts down here, Medowee, Arlington, Winhall, Sandgate, those are guesses because they're having discussions on their own about how to fit in Act 46. But we don't have any similar structure, so we couldn't bring them into the merged school district unless they wanted to radically change. There's a lot of information on there. Can I clarify any of this? Are people?
Yes, you just said that, and I came in late, but no similar structure. So what is the difference of the blue and the green?
It's a good question. Again, Medowee is K-6, but they designate New York schools for high school.
Okay.
So that's not a fit. Winhall, and they're apparently talking to Sandgate, are both non-operating districts. They don't run schools. So we can't be fit with them because we operate schools.
Okay.
And you can't have a split there. And Arlington operates a K through 12 school. So again, we don't match up with them because we only operate K through 6 or K through 8 schools.
Okay. Thank you.
8th grade schools. But again, I put a question mark there because we don't have any control over whether they're going to be part of our supervisory union. But we know they won't be part of our merged district. They won't be part of the one board unless they decide they radically want to change. But at this point, it's fair to say that that's too late. You know, this merger committee has moved forward under this model of merging, again, these 9 towns together.
When it comes to the BRSU, if the school district is all going to be consolidated like that, I would presume that the BRSU will also be consolidating and probably laying off people as their jobs are becoming more centralized, that there's going to be efficiencies there. Is that correct?
It's a good question. It depends on what the ultimate design of that supervisory union is going to be. And the timing of that probably will not line up with our moving forward with the school district. Again, because it's primarily in the state's hands. If Arlington's not currently in our supervisory union, if they come in, it's probably going to add costs to the supervisory union. We did look at several different models, including them, and I think we came to the conclusion that all the districts in the supervisory union would benefit. Is that correct? Do you guys remember that? That
As far as
The dollar
having the additional districts right in the supervisory union, because it's a bigger pool of costs to share.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I
actually,
think
financially,
you're
it might be better. But back to your question about staff and other things like that, we'd have to wait and see what the eventual supervisory union is. If Arlington isn't part of it, it probably won't have to change that much. If Arlington's in, they're going to have additional costs, but that will be spread and shared with Arlington and all of these other districts.
So I was wondering, have we, since you've gotten so far on the different organizational structure, have the homestead taxes of the different towns now been compared, and have we looked at what changes they will see as the homestead tax goes to the one district?
Yeah, and I'll show you the implications for Dorset in another slide, I think. I'm on 9. I think I have 13 slides in total. This is another small detail, and I put an A next to these, and I don't mean to get caught up into too much specific detail here, but if Sunderland, Mount Tabor, and Danby decided not to join this merger, the merger could still go forward with the remaining districts and towns. So right now, the committee is considering them as advisable districts versus necessary districts. So we need certain mass, certain scale, certain number of students to be able to merge and meet the requirements under Act 46. What I'm trying to say is we want these folks to be our partners in this. If they chose not to be our partners in this, these other towns, including Dorset, could and would still move forward if those districts have voted yes for the merger. Is that confusing, or can I clarify that?
What is the change then that happens under this merger from what we have now? Which looks like kind of the same thing.
Because you'd be putting all 9 towns together under one school board and one budget.
One school board.
Mm-hmm. I'll show you the makeup of the school board. I only have 4 more slides, but there must be a lot of information in there.
So it's my understanding that the school boards themselves are not actually costing almost anything. Like each school board is largely volunteer. So that's not a paid entity.
Right.
That group of people that are devoting their time to managing the cost of the school. So would the state be amenable if you could do a broad regional cost saving in terms of, say, oil or, whatever, paper or things that could be shared that you wouldn't even have to necessarily be in a district? You could just say, we'll go, this big group of people, all these schools will share.
We've already done that in the supervisory union structure. That's basically why they were put in place 100 years ago, to do exactly what you're talking about.
Right, so
they already share so many services.
Right.
We've already done a pretty good job of cutting out a lot of costs. We don't have an accountant here. That accountant is a shared function at the supervisory union. We do some level of purchasing together.
So where's the savings that they're anticipating? Like they're actually removing a kind of micro level of examination of each school's budget by eliminating the board, that those people have the greatest incentive to in fact examine the costs going on.
It's a good question. I can't speak for the state, exactly where they're looking for savings. Does anybody else want to chime in on that?
I think it's this gets back to that equity piece. What's the interpretation of Act 46? And I think there's a field of thought that this a combined governance structure could potentially lead to greater innovation or allow more freedom of movement within governance. And so, right now, let's say we want to find a regional solution, some regional solutions within Manchester and Dorset. Because of the governance, you have these separate boards, okay, and all these separate boards with these 9 towns. Well, you can have, one interpretation is that that's a siloed effect, okay. So these different silos, these different governing bodies, that's hard for them to work together to find regional solutions. And so it's really up to the future board in a merger, under a merger, to find those cost savings. And that's what I think that the hope is by many under Act 46, that with a more of a regional governance structure, you can find those efficiencies.
Even though the supervisory union was put in place to find those efficiencies?
Some of them. Yeah, some of them. But they do special ed, right? And they do a lot of centralized stuff as far as transportation. But there could potentially be some other, by working together within a governance structure, the interpretation is they could potentially find more efficiencies. And we outlined some of these in our worksheet, which...
We looked at potential cost savings for our districts. We didn't see a lot. I mean, you eliminate the boards, you eliminate an audit for each district. The accounting functions will probably be simpler again, because you have one set of financial statements instead of multiple. But we didn't see that as being, huge for our districts. Again, what is the state looking at? I don't really know, other than what I read in the law in regards to student-teacher ratio. I mean, you know, that drives costs throughout the state. You know, if you have fewer students per teacher, per administrator, that's going to drive up your per pupil costs.
But that's not going to change unless you're able to move kids from one school to another.
I don't disagree with that.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think another
Yeah.
important point, Jim, is that, you know, while we are very efficient here at the SU, I think more so than many, at the end of the day, because the nature of the funding mechanism, if other people are really inefficient, then because of the funding system, we all pay for it at the end of the day as a state. And so hopefully other people can gain some efficiencies, and hopefully that can help this region.
That might be the answer to my question. So what I'm trying to understand, making this consolidated district, if we have a $6 million budget and a neighboring town has a $4 million budget, is our $2 million to bring them up to?
Yeah, we would share it. It would be one big pot.
Lose control and lose money, or money that's currently.
It would be one big pot. That's right. We're getting into more details, so let me keep going. And this might help clarify some of the things we're talking about. So here's some issues that we've tackled when we wanted to communicate. Well, if we merge these 9 towns together, how would it operate? We're looking at a 13-member board. This is what our committee has agreed we would put in the articles of agreement. A 9-member new single school board. 13-member single school board. 9 from each of those towns. So every town in the district would be guaranteed 1 school board seat. The remaining 4 seats would be voted on what we call at-large, or at-large members from the 4 largest towns. Those towns being Dorset, Manchester, Londonderry, and Danby. So get out your notebooks, folks. If this moves forward, we're going to need board members next year. We could potentially have 5 board members from Dorset if we had, you know, people willing to serve. Everybody in the new school district would vote on all 13 members. Okay? But that also means that no town, you know, would be overbalanced in that board, would never have a majority. But also all towns would be guaranteed at least 1 representative. I think Mount Tabor only has 14 students right now in the school district, but they're still guaranteed, you know, 1 full vote, 1 full seat on that future school board.
Okay, this kind of goes back to the last slide, but I have to ask. So I'm on the UD 23 school board, and I'm on the BRSU school board, and my children go to the Dorset school.
Yeah.
Because they're in middle school. So you said that, and we live in Danby, right? So you said that the Mount Tabor, Danby, and Sunderland were going to be advisory votes, right? Votes. But if Mount Tabor voted no, because their taxes are going to go up big time, that's not happening. But a courier is a Mount Tabor and a Danby school. Do you know what's gonna happen? If Danby votes yes.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen under that scenario.
Yeah, they're connected at the hip. What one does, the other has to do. Yeah, so if Danby votes yes, Mount Tabor votes no.
School boards.
Yep, if Danby says, or Mount Tabor says no, then Danby cannot proceed.
So more than likely, they would just stay the way that they are. Does anybody else have questions on the board representation? Am I losing people? It's a lot of detail.
Can I just, and again, I don't know if this is something that you all discuss or if you've ever heard a bit about it, but my very, and I say very basic understanding was Act 60 basically was created, took all the tax dollars from the richer towns and kept open all these little schools that couldn't afford to stay open. And now we're passing Act 46, so we can now take all the towns that are, and schools that are functioning well, and take more of their money and stick it into the other schools and make certain schools close. So I just, well, anyway, a little frustration.
Well, in some places. But wasn't it, East Montpelier, they had taken out a bunch of bonds to fix schools. And so the budgetary, the schools that were looking at merging with them, but they had tight budgets, didn't want to take on that debt. So that might be the case here, but it isn't necessarily the case across the state.
There's a little bit more to chew on here, folks. In regards to school closures, the law says there's a 4-year, can't close a school for 4 years under this law. Okay, that's good. If this merger goes through, let's say we fast forward 4 or 5 years, and the new school board says, we're still losing students financially, we might need to close a school. Our committee has decided that there would have to be public forums in the whole district, but specifically in the school that would be affected, and a non-binding public vote. So if Dorset was a school 5 years down the road that the new school board said, we need to close the Dorset school, we'd have forums, we'd have a non-binding public vote, and there'd have to be just over 75%, 10 of the 13 board members would have to vote in favor of closing a school. So
This is very detailed. When does that 4-year clock start ticking?
it's a good question. After the effective date of the merger.
So 2017.
No, it'd be 2018 would be if these towns merge, it would be 2018. So you would
July
say
1.
probably, 2012.
2022.
4 years after 2018. What did I say?
2020.
Oh, sorry, 2020. 2022. Here's another interesting one. Dorset operates a K through 8 school. Courier and Sunderland are K through 6. They currently have choice for 7th and 8th grade. So our committee has decided we would grandfather anybody who's sort of caught up in this transition. So if a student lives in Danby and is currently going to Long Trail, we wouldn't make them leave Long Trail for their 8th grade year. We'd allow them to continue. The new district would pay that tuition. So financially, it wouldn't add any cost. It just wouldn't take any costs away from the new district. We'd also allow a younger sibling, if they were one class year behind, to follow in their path of their older siblings, so that we're not forcing families to go in different directions to accommodate this merger. Let me follow up and finish this before taking questions. So this brings up an interesting scenario, because ultimately, if we bring all 9 towns together, we're going to have all students going to school within the new district eventually. So that brings up the thought that 7th and 8th grade students from Courier and Sunderland would be going to one of the 3 in-district schools that offer 7th and 8th grade. Not sure I'm describing this the right way. If you're following me so far.
That's fine.
So we've been told that if you're going to allow those students to then choose a school to attend for 7th and 8th grade, we may have to allow all children in the district to choose their school for 7th and 8th grade. As a committee, we decided we were not going to put rules around that in-district choice for 7th and 8th grade. The future school board would need to accommodate and decide, what those rules could be. Would it be a giant open lottery where all 7th and 8th grade students in this new big district would decide where to go? that might be too extreme. But there would need to be, again, an equitable allowance if you're allowing certain students in the district to choose which school to go to for 7th and 8th grade. All students would need to choose that. It's confusing.
Has that been rejected by the state already?
No, in fact, it's probably an accommodation for the state. Because again, we have these, Courier and Sunderland don't operate 7th and 8th grade, so how do we fold those students into the new district? They need to go somewhere. A lot of them already come to the in-school district, so they have that choice. What we're being told is we would need to broaden that for everybody in the district. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly what those parameters would be. Does anybody want to clarify that for us?
Can I just ask why would that have to be? In other words, if you've already got a choice and you're there, why
Right.
would you have to have the option? It's obvious that there's certain towns where they just don't have the facilities. So
Right.
Why, it doesn't seem to me to be
Right.
a detriment to any student to continue on to the school.
Mhm.
Whereas if we open it up, it turns into a huge jigsaw puzzle where everyone and their friends wants to figure out which is the best.
Yeah,
school.
I hope that's not where it would lead, that there would, again, a new school board would come together and say, we got to figure out this problem, so it doesn't become this big, open, crazy lottery. But your question is why, and it gets back to equity, you have to treat all the students in the district the same. So if we give any in-district choice to a 7th and 8th grader, so if a 7th or 8th grader from Sunderland, wanted to go to Flowbrook School, equitably, we'd have to open that up so that other students could consider that same option. What are the details? Our committee has said, we're not going to set the rules on that. It's going to be overly complicated for this merger process to try to set the rules for that. The future school board would have to look at that.
Okay, so a point on that too, though. Sunderland, the board could decide that Sunderland students all go to MEMS, for example, or all Courier kids go to MEMS, and then there could be no in-district choice, right? So it doesn't have to. They don't have to give Sunderland, Danby, Mount Tabor kids choice. But this is an idea that was kicked around in the committee. We thought it could be potentially exciting. Some of us thought it was an exciting idea. And a lot of like Hartford, Connecticut does this, where you have in-district choice, but you have you go through a lottery system for a lot of these schools. A lot of places do this, and maybe all Dorset kids would have first right to going to Dorset, and then could have an option in their space. I don't know. It's up to the new board.
Yeah, I'll be very open. I mean, this is one of the difficult things about moving forward and considering all this. We will not have a definite answer on what this means. That's why we want to get it out now so that people can think about it, ask us questions, and consider it. I didn't see this one coming when we started this process. And I think we still need to, the committee still needs to kind of work through this one a little bit before it's final, but this is the direction we seem to be going. Rob, you had a question?
Well, just under that situation, to keep the equity, was there any discussion about would that force the need for a junior high, basically?
No, but you can sort of see where that would lend a lot of merit to a discussion of, do you now bring all the kids together? Again, we're going to have to kick that down the road to the future school board if they go that route.
What does that do to choice for going to Maple Street or another school that offers?
Choice for who?
For students who, in a K-6 school, who usually have the opportunity to go to a private school?
Well, again, only.
Is that gone now?
Yes. Yeah, they'll be, because again, we have to treat everybody the same. So only the kids who are caught in that sort of grandfathering couple of years would be allowed to continue with that. Any future students in the district would be at an in-district school.
Wait, so choice, if you want to go out of the state, you're not going to be,
I think you're talking about high school now.
9 to 12, that stays?
That stays the same, tuition all 9 through 12 students.
Okay.
I was under the impression that the state had said to certain districts, if you have a local school that can accommodate, then no, you can't have choice to go further. Is that incorrect?
And what grades are you talking about? Like,
No, I can't
Because we would be keeping the students in this district. That's what we're saying. High school is different because we don't operate a high school, so we'll be tuitioning all students.
So the state wouldn't, I was under the impression that certain towns might actually benefit from Act 46 because they might get choice that they currently didn't have for better schools, and then some of the plans that went through the state taken away. If you have a school there that, can accommodate and is right there in the town, you're not getting choice to go 2 towns over to a better school, but maybe I'm incorrect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of circles back to the fact that, the districts need to have the same enrollment structures. So I'm not sure, I don't know exactly what you might be thinking about. Paul and Rupert and Wells, who just went through a discussion where they designate schools, and they're still having a discussion on should we open that up and allow our students to be tuitioned to other schools.
This is the Upper Valley, so.
Okay. Okay.
It could be totally.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what.
Can I just ask, just factually, about approximately how many students we're talking about in the school district?
1,700 versus 300 in the Dorset school. There's a question in the back?
What's the purpose of a non-binding public vote?
Make sure that people's voice is being heard, within the school board. I would assume that they're going to be heard, but we want to make it definitive, to have make sure that step isn't missed. But I would, assurance that nothing is missed, I think is what it comes down to.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, if it's illegal to offer different choice options, how is it legal to grandfather?
We've asked the same question, not using legal or illegal termination, but it's been done in other mergers. So we've been told you're okay to do it for this grandfathering transition period, and then it's not an indefinite grandfathering of students.
My second question is, if you can offer in-district choice, why can't you include independent or private schools in that choice?
Because they're not in the district, right? They're separate outside schools. That would be tuitioning, and now you're talking about mixing, tuitioning with operating schools, and that's a no-no, from what I understand, for operating a school district. I mean, if you're talking about a bigger, broader question, bring it up with the state legislators, I assume, if that's where you're headed. John, did you have a comment?
No, you got it.
I know this is a lot, folks. Hang in there. Appreciate it. So I think Lisa, you asked about taxes. The information I'm going to give you is for reference only. And remember, if the merger goes forward, this is going to be out 2 years from now. The future school board will be putting together a detailed budget. Our job is just to look and say, is anything big coming, positive or negative, if we merge together. So this is not a budget, and this is just an estimated impact on taxes to Dorset as we see it if this merger went through. So in our current school year, 2016-2017, the tax rate for Dorset, after the CLA and all the other, calculations are done at the state level, we pay $1.44 per 100 value. If we brought all these 9 towns together right now today under this budget year with no other changes, not even looking at the savings from the school boards and the audits, if we just mashed everybody together and divided by the 1,700 students, our tax rate for Dorset would estimated would go up about 3 cents. Again, no other changes. That's if we just took the budgets as they were now and pushed them together. There are incentives, however, and I think it's important to pause and just look at that. Why is it going up? It's going up because all these 5 districts and 9 towns, all have different tax rates. They all have different common levels of appraisal on their homes. So they're all operating with different tax rates. If we mash everybody together, there's going to be one average. There's going to be one mean. And right now, we're slightly below that mean. I think you were saying, Mount Tabor. would go up a lot, okay? Sunderland would go up a lot. Manchester would go down a little bit.
Sunderland and Mount Tabor, there's actually, could be really beneficial for them, they're finding right now.
Sure,
Yeah.
but from a pure, tax base,
You're just not allowed to change at more than 5%.
Is that a uniform tax rate, or is that specific to Dorset?
that's specific to Dorset because that includes our current CLA, a 107.5, which is going to change probably, right? So, yeah, I forget what it was, 153 or something was the uniform rate before the CLA, but again, everybody has a different CLA. So that would be just for Dorset. Is that clear?
What's the CLA?
Common level of appraisal. Is there any realtors in the room that can help me with that? It's an adjustment to your tax base based on, you don't do a full appraisal on your towns every year.
Okay.
Rob is probably good
the
at
ratio.
answering that question. There are incentives if you move forward with a merger, okay? And the model we're going under would be 8-cent tax cut in the first year, going down to 6 cents in the next year, then 4, and then 2. So again, I think it's important to pause and just see what happens without incentives. With incentives, our tax rate would go down. Again, if we just merged today. Here's my disclaimer, that does not include any statewide changes. We had a question in the back about, who pays for all this? Well, somebody needs to pay for all the incentives that are being put out in the state. And guess what? That comes from our common educational budget. So whether we merge or not, we're going to be paying for all of these incentives. Can we quantify that? I don't know. If 50 out of 250 districts in the state are merging this year and getting 10 cents, 2 cents, 3 cents, does anybody want to put out a different number? What's that?
Depends on how big the districts are.
Depends on how big the districts are. So again, this is if we were merged today. It's intended to give you some level of guidance on what could change if we merge.
Any thought about quantifying it? So the 8 cents is a new district-wide incentive? Is that
Right.
everybody gets an 8-cent
Right.
reduction? Any thought about quantifying that to come up with just in case, if it comes up in this process, what does that mean in money?
Yeah, I think you probably need to.
I think I asked you the same question going the other way last year. I asked you what $100,000 was, right? I'm putting you on the spot, Rob.
Answered here, but,
We could probably figure it out,
Yeah.
but I don't. But it's I think
it's obviously the piece is not here to sell.
so. So to say to Dorset, 8 cents means how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of
or
dollars?
across the the working group across the.
Yeah, I'm sure we can get a ballpark for that. Yeah, yeah, and that's important. And incentives, give you a personal opinion, I think should be part of this conversation. But that shouldn't be the only reason to do this, But again, the statewide changes are other districts are merging, other people are getting these incentives, and everybody's going to have to pay for that, whether they merge or not.
So there are successful mergers right now?
Yes.
And they're operating?
I don't know if any have moved to actual operations yet. Do you know, Jim? A couple.
July 1st.
They've been voted in, but they're in transition period.
Yeah.
So they're probably all in transition.
Actually, one quick
Maybe
question.
some.
So is this falling under what they're calling the alternative structure?
Yes. Back to that.
Right?
Yeah.
And the new date that they've given us for when they're going to start looking at the alternative structured ones, is that still going to fall within the tax
Yes.
rebate period?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Somebody else want to add here? Should I move on?
Can I just
Yep.
ask a quick question? I see all of this, but I guess my real question is, so now we've got a big board. We've got
Okay.
one, maybe 2 members from Dorset. How does this actually affect the operation of the school in terms of if we're talking about they're deciding one budget for all of these different schools, and they're going to say, okay, you know what, Dorset, we've got these other schools and we want to be equitable and they're small and they've got nothing, so we're going to give them all iPads and everything else, and we're going to take away one of your teachers are too expensive, but they're in a union, so maybe that doesn't count. But we're going to take away some of your resources. How does that impact the actual education?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, you
You're gonna
have to.
a board that's going to be taking away
You have-
from the schools that are functioning in a better capacity and giving to the schools, again, that are not. So that takes away our resources, is that correct?
That's a argument, yeah. I mean, the new school board is going to be looking at 1,700 students instead of 300 students. That's going to be a tough job to do that.
And Mount Tabor has 14 students, is that correct?
I think they have 14 students, yeah, in total.
So we get a little incentive there, which we're going to pay for out of a different pocket.
Mhm.
Okay.
Along those lines, well, you know, what would the new merged school board need to deal with? How do you run the school operations? How do you do that equitably? Our committee is not going to be that new school board.
Right.
So again, we're kind of looking, you know, at all the technical pieces. Can these districts come together and what it look at? You're bringing up very good points. This committee doesn't have the answer to those questions. We can debate it, and we should talk about it in future months. We don't have the answers. We might have personal opinions, but it's a very good point. How would a new school board operate with that structure? Again, we talked a little bit about the model for 7th and 8th grade in district choice. If indeed the new district had to do that, we're being led to believe that they would need to provide some level of choice for 7th and 8th grade. Are there any transportation changes, Justine, you talked about? Yeah. We're not advocating, unless it came up the other night, I missed the meeting, you know, any dramatic changes in transportation at the moment. But if you started moving kids around a little bit differently, it's going to add costs, might add time. New school board's going to have to look at that. Talked a little bit about school closures or expansions, you know, a possible common middle school. And here are additional topics. We know that either the merger study committee or the Dorset School Board and the other school board districts are going to have to talk about, you know, do we have to do this? It's the $1 million question. What are our other options, and what happens if we vote no? We don't have the answers to those questions right now. Again, we can start that discussion, and that's why we wanted to bring everybody together tonight. But there's a lot more that we need to uncover. And again, to be quite open, some of these things aren't going to be finalized before we ask for a vote. Sir?
We're talking about the Dorset school basically here, this group here, but do you have any feeling as to what the discussion is going on in Manchester, which is the largest school of all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any feeling as to whether there is a strong kind of orientation toward accepting this, or is there a strong undercurrent of no? Do you have any feeling at all?
Personally, I do not. I don't. John might have a perspective.
I'm trying to speak to that. You know, there's in the paper today, there's a group, and Brian's name, Vogel, in the back there, former board member, was mentioned in the story, and I was as well. So there was a, as far as what the general consensus is, I haven't done any polling, but I've heard some pretty positive feedback. And we haven't had a lot of people come to the meetings, as much as we might try. And so there has been, you know, for years, there's been, you know, a smaller group of people who've advocated for, you know, closing MEMS and you know, changing the enrollment options for the whole district. Now, you know, I don't know how large this sentiment is, but you know, it's been there for a few years. There was actually a committee convened when we went through, when we said, when I was on the board back then last year, when we joined the study committee, there was an ad hoc committee met to explore other options. That kind of fizzled out. Apparently, I think it's still active, but has not been officially turned off. But it's hard to know what people see or how big this perspective is. But
I just thought I'd throw it out.
Yeah, but I haven't seen. You know, this is all pretty new to me. No one has come to talk to us, and we haven't had people come to ask us about the process from this group. And so, I don't really know that much about it because it's also new. But I think there's people in the Manchester that I've spoken to, after distributing so much material, have been pretty positive, and especially I think they're pretty reasonable too. Even though our meeting turnouts are small. And when you look at like some of the possible uncertainty, if we don't merge, I'm speaking from Manchester's perspective now, there's a lot of uncertainty, losing incentives. Then you could possible spending penalties that could be imposed by the legislature in this session. We might have to merge anyway, and let's say we became non-operational, we might have to merge with Winall, was has a $1.07 tax rate, the highest of any in the county, because they're non-operational, so that might bring ours up. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and one thing I've learned in Manchester is that they don't like a lot of uncertainty. So
I'm going to suggest don't go anywhere this winter. Are you planning on being here? Because I think we're going to have a lot more discussion on these final, these 3 questions. I got 2 more slides. I'm going to give you a timeline of where we think we're going to go. And I'm going to give you a summary. I'll answer any other questions, and if you feel like you need to leave, thank you for being here. So our merger committee is going to vote on that key question: is it advisable to merge? We haven't hit any technical roadblocks that would stop us from saying yes. We see that these districts can come together. Technically, we're going to have to vote on that in November, and I'm not saying we definitely will, but I have not seen anything that would suggest we won't.
But you mentioned that twice, and there's a difference between technical roadblocks and advisable.
Yeah.
Advisable is it a good idea, not is there something
I
that's
disagree.
preventing us?
I disagree with you. I think that again, we're not here to sell Act 46. So, I actually do think this is mostly, at this point, a technical conversation. Can we put this forward to the voters? We're going to have more conversations, and ultimately, the voters are going to be the ones that decide whether it's going to move forward or not. Have we talked about advantages and disadvantages? Sure, but nothing is shaken out of the tree that says there's massive reasons not to try to structure this together. So.
Perhaps if you use the word, is it possible? Because possible says, are there roadblocks or are there not roadblocks? Whereas I think advisable is a very different word. It implies a certain amount of belief and sense of positive feeling behind
Sure.
it. So.
Okay. I'm trying to stay as objective as possible. And I don't remember a definition of this question other than it's kind of ultimately what they want the merger study committee to answer. We can look around us. There are other districts that got to that point and said, no, we have too many differences. Something's breaking down. Technically, that's the way I was looking at it. We have different structures. We can't do it. We can't move past those technical issues. So, no, we can't advise that it's not possible to move forward.
Well, one question about the vote might be, can you ever back out, like once you're committed to this?
You're talking about once the district votes.
Once the whole thing's settled, say the vote was a yes, and say you're in this new configuration.
Right.
And say the voters in the town are unhappy with either the education that results or with the cost.
Right.
Could the town decide, you know what, we don't like this, and we just want to get out?
Okay, I'm not a legal expert, but my answer would be the town could not decide, but the entire district could decide if they did not. Do you guys see it the same way? They did not want to stay together. So Dorset couldn't pull out of a new district if there was a new district. The whole district could vote to dissolve, but that would probably be pretty hard to do.
Right, I mean, the Dorset right now isn't standing to gain financially, and it's an open question mark, what will happen with the education. So that the voters maybe would be interested in knowing that once you've moved to this
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah.
It's absolutely,
That's a very good
no
point.
longer be in control of your destiny as a town in terms of your education.
Understood.
As a town.
Yeah. I'm sensing it's pretty much irreversible, but that's a good point we will bring up when we get to larger public forums this winter. We should clarify that. Yeah, this isn't a test case. If it goes forward, it's going to go forward.
I think just as a case in point, Jamaica wanted to get out of Leland and Gray. And it wasn't so simple as those townsfolk wanted to vote and get out. They had to have approval from the other union members. So I think, to Jim's point, it's just not your town anymore. Once you become part of this, it's going to be the whole group. So we got to make sure you want to be in it, because it'll be hard to get out.
Yeah, with the whole sort of question on advisable and all that, I just kind of wanted, would you guys all view your deliberations as including a significant element of coming up with a view as to whether it's a positive or a negative from an educational perspective?
Take a shot at that first, Jim.
They're all looking at you.
I disagree to put the PowerPoint together.
Jim,
I think it's hard to say.
the advisable, I think that advisable question, that relates to the policy objectives, and that's where we started our work. Right? The Act 46 policy objectives that Jim put up there initially, right? And so that's how we have to start our work, right? And does this increase equity, educational outcomes, transparency, what are the regional effects, right? And so for my interpretation, when you put that advisable stamp on there, you are saying that yes, this does meet the policy objectives, right? It does do these things, and we have a whole list of potential outcomes or potential gains on a worksheet that we've developed that speaks to educational outcomes as well.
Because I think that to me, my view on Act 46 is it's all driven by those 5 items, and it includes like transparency, But it's in the end, what you're trying to determine as a merger study committee is, that's the goal to make improvements in terms of the equity, the educational outcomes, the transparency, the cost, etc. And does this accomplish that? It's been my take.
And following up on Jim, less doom and gloom, but John had mentioned innovation, and that's kind of in that same line. I don't know if there's, in some of those positives, is there a place or an example maybe where that innovation, not to either scare or make a positive for anybody here, but is there something that, an example you could give kind of across the bigger district as just an example of where, there's a positive in terms of agreeing with it's advisable because there's this type of a positive for the 9 towns. Other thought?
How about the Dorset meeting? I don't want to speak out of turn. I will speak and give me.
You guys had a meeting where all the principals came.
Yeah.
That we're talking about, right?
Middle school
What were some of those
potential,
ideas?
right? Middle school potential, closer working relationship between principals and teachers, and again, the SU facilitates a lot of that, but that's a potential benefit, a shared vision, a shared set of standards and goals, pretty broad stuff. We haven't gotten into the details, what happens in the classroom. It's probably not going to fall to this committee.
Yeah, if you take one example, that regional middle school, I saw my 7th grade health teacher the other day, EMS, and we talked about this work and, talked about somehow regional middle schools came up. And she said, oh, they were talking about that since I've been here, in the 80s, in the 70s, and it's been around forever, right? So this idea of whether this is a good idea, right, as I can see, has never fully been explored because potentially, so not that it can't be, because we can have regional middle school now, right? But, it's hard to communicate, with other boards. You can through the BRSU board, but that's harder, right? So it's harder to communicate with these other boards, right? And so that's one example where potentially you can have more room for innovation set up between schools. And then think of special teachers, right? If you have a half-time French teacher or Spanish teacher at one school, and another half-time teacher somewhere else, Okay, well, maybe we can figure out a way that, we have a full-time teacher that can share these roles, and maybe if we can put application out for a full-time teacher, we'll get a deeper pool of applicants and a better pool of applicants. And so those are just two small examples, and I can, we've talked about a little more, but again, that's the future boards. That's their innovative work that they will have to find those innovations.
Let me finish the timeline here. We'll be presenting a draft report to the State Board of Ed, most likely in November. We'll get feedback. The holidays obviously get in the way. December or January, is that still fair?
December.
Yeah. Feedback?
Yeah. We'll be hosting larger public forums, and again, hopefully the Dorset School Board can get involved with furthering the discussions here, not just the Merger Study Committee. We'll have more pros and cons. We want to hear back from you. You've presented a lot of good questions, a lot of things to think on. More complete information. Are there penalties? Answering the questions. What happens if you don't move forward? We would expect there to be a vote on the merger and the articles sometime around town meeting day, maybe a little sooner, maybe a little later. There is somewhat of a time crunch because of the incentives that are available, that if we move forward, a vote would need to be affirmative before July 1, 2017. Okay? So if there was a positive vote of the necessary districts and hopefully all of the districts, the new district would be operational July 1, 2018. If one or more of the necessary districts voted no, it could go back for a revote anytime before July 1, 2017 to receive those red incentives. We could still end up merging down the road if we don't do it now, but we would lose those incentives. Again, if you look at if this moves forward, being operational July 1, 2018, if we vote in March or April and it moves forward, you're looking at 12 to 14 or 15 months for a new school board to form. Start to get involved in all the issues we've just put on the table and put this district in operation. So 12 to 14 months, not a lot of time. That is the time frame we could potentially move on. So here's a quick summary. And what's it all mean? The school district governance structure would change for Dorset. Dorset would no longer solely run the Dorset school. Part of a bigger board. We'd be a minority in that board. At the most, 5 out of 13. More likely 2 or 3, but who knows. Board representation changes. Tax rates and financial inputs into that model would change and how that affects Dorset. I tried to show a little bit of that. Here's the postscript. Act 46 is probably still evolving, so thank you for coming. It's tough to make decisions. There's going to be a new legislative session. Maybe all your time has been devoted to listening to the presidential candidates, but we have a governor race here too. And you might want to listen to what they're talking about. I know one of them said the other day that they get to a point they will have within their first term 4 appointments to a State Board of Ed. Jim, that has how many members on it?
I'm not sure.
It's not a majority. 4 wouldn't be a majority, but this is still a moving target, folks, unfortunately. But I understand it's difficult to try to make decisions when there's a little bit of uncertainty. The big message is, we move forward, we're part of a larger system. And in fact, Act 46 requires you to look at being part of a larger system, focused on more students. Answering the question, who are our students? Are they just Dorset, or are they part of a broader system? Are they part of a state system? They're part of a supervisory union system. Under this merged district, we're looking at roughly 1,700 students versus 300 now. That was a lot to digest, folks. Thanks for being here.
I would like to just thank all of you for actually grappling with this. Because it is,
Thanks for willing to.
Let me just throw out, because I've attended a heck of a lot of their meetings, and just wanted to, assure everybody, at least from my perspective, these guys have been doing a phenomenal job. They've got 15 meetings that have run about, the average meeting is about 3 hours long since May. They've been working their tails off and really accomplishing a lot. Also, John's been doing a great job as chair, Richard as vice chair. And it's just, so your comments are well placed.
Our work is somewhat ending, though, and your work is now beginning.
Yeah.
And this is a good first or second or third step for a lot of you to say, what's it going to mean? We are asking for feedback on anything you've seen tonight, questions you're going to need to have answered, between now and when this, moves forward to a vote. Brian, you had another question?
Yeah, how do you guarantee that each town has a representative on the board?
How?
Yeah.
I mean, legally, or what?
Well, what if nobody from Dorset decided to run for the school?
There has to be at least one.
Yeah, I guess there technically has to be one.
What would you do in this case?
Has it ever happened?
I know the structure, but I'm just curious.
I don't know, I've never thought about it.
That doesn't happen.
I hope one person in the town wants to be represented, but it's a lot of work, so yeah, maybe.
The other thing is theoretically, if more than one person from Dorset ran,
Right.
you could have a majority of the Dorset vote, but still lose, because it's all 9 towns voting, correct?
Right.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So you're gonna have a lot of people voting for you that don't know you, most likely.
Hopefully.
I think, one thing I just kind of wanted to ask you guys real quick is, as I said, I've been to a lot of these meetings and all. How would you kind of characterize the, these are representatives from all of these towns who are part of it. How would you characterize the, your merger study committee hasn't broken apart like a lot of others, and how would you characterize the how the towns are working together at that level?
I think excellently. I mean, I'm really very pleasantly surprised that everybody is dedicated. Everybody's asking good questions. Everybody's thinking. There isn't one person in that group that just is not in. Everybody's involved and interested in and dedicated in doing the charge that we have been given. We haven't slowed down. I don't think we've slowed down at all, and we do have differences of opinion, but everybody accepts everybody else's opinion, and, we've had votes where people have voted no. But no, I think we work very well together.
I think it's interesting you actually bring that up, because one of the key elements that you just saw on the slides tonight was the new board composition would be 13 seats, right? And if you look at it by population, Mount Tabor would have a lot to lose in terms of what their seat allocation would be on a new board, and some of the smaller towns. So what we see is a lot of give and take. So the smaller towns, we'd say, okay, we'll give you a full seat on the board, but in exchange for that, the larger towns, Dorset, Manchester, Londonderry, and Danby, we want an at-large, those 4 at-large seats. So you do see a lot of that compromise going on. I think that's it's pretty nice democracy and work.
Yeah.
Well, just getting back to the physical location part of it, if you've got a town, let's say you form the district, right? You've got towns that are over an hour away in terms of the students, and it's not sustainable in those towns, to keep a small school running, but it's not physically possible to bring them closer within a reasonable bus ride. What is the solution going to be? Are you thinking ahead that far?
I don't think that's our charge at this moment.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it, unfortunately, you know, a detail we're not getting into, because we're not putting in place any changes to the physical schools. You know, none of them are going to change. Most students are going to stay where they are. The students that have, you know, choice are going to be grandfathered in. So, you know, I think technically we could have shaken it all up, formed a middle school, put that in the Articles of Agreement, but we decided that just didn't feel right to make that radical of a change. That question would specifically be for the new school board to answer if there's going to be broader changes. How do you move these students around if you're going to move the structure of the schools around? Does that help answer the question?
Well, I guess Mount Tabor, you said had 14 kids?
I think they only have 14 in that district,
And
yeah.
that's K through 6?
Well, they go to Courier.
They go to Courier and then they get a choice, right?
Yeah, they don't have a physical
No.
plant
Right.
in Mount Tabor.
But that school, we're not changing that with that school at this point.
14 K to 12.
No,
No,
they-
no.
1875.
Yeah.
No, but that's, you bring up, again, an important consideration. You know, if you try to think 5 or 10 years down the road, should I be thinking about, you know, what might happen down the road?
Well, sustainability being the main issue of Act 46, that seems to be, you know, kind of the top policy for that act. So I guess I was thinking, like, how sustainable, you know, if this population drop and continues the way it is. But I guess you're right, it's not something you can really look at a crystal ball and determine right now.
Sorry.
Sure. I want to echo the thanks to all of you. I'm very appreciative that every one of you has been so thoughtful and informed about this, and I feel really lucky to have you representing us. I just want to address the article that does describe the Manchester kind of buzz that's going on and the statements that were made in that article. I know that you've been talking about districts as being necessary districts versus advisable districts. And in the article, the statement was made, if Manchester did not go ahead with the merger, it would essentially defeat the merger for all. What is that? Is that a numbers thing? Is that about what? Why is that?
So to be order to be eligible for the incentives, you have to have a certain number of students, essentially, and so I think, you know, Manchester does not have to be necessarily necessary.
Okay.
Because I think Mountain Town's red and Dorset would have enough, right?
I think it'll be over. Yeah,
it's like right there, really close. Yeah, it's so really close. So,
We had more babies.
but that would, you know, I think I would have a hard time. I would really push the committee not to list Manchester as advisable. I think it'd be bad for all of our kids to create this donut hole in the district.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, and I'm speaking as a Manchester rep here, that, you know, and someone who went to BBA and grew up with kids all around here, right, and from all the surrounding communities, you know, in our study group, our motto we adopted last night, was it 2 nights ago? I can't remember. Yeah, it was for the motto we passed a motion for the study group was all our kids are all our kids. And I think that gets to Jim's point, the camaraderie on the study group, that, you know, thinking what's best for all our kids. And, you know, I would think it would be, I would hope that Manchester would stay, you know, as necessary in this process, because I think it would really complicate matters if we weren't part of this merger, and so that's my 2 cents as a Manchester rep. But just legally, if one of the necessaries does not pass, the whole thing fails.
We didn't really talk about everybody being advisable. I mean, there needs to be critical mass. Geographically, size-wise, you know, it seems logical that the bigger 3 districts now would need to be part of this. So that's kind of why we went with that delineation. I don't think we could make everybody advisable and see who's left, you know, at the end of the vote.
I have
have just a small question, and maybe it's something that you haven't thought of, or it's not really your job yet. But a little bit to Brian's point, if each school has one mandatory representative, then would it not make sense for each town to simply vote on that person? In other words, I can't vote on who's going to be on the school board in Londonderry or in Landgrove or in any other town. So would it not make sense to split the vote till you get one representative each, and then the at-large? I don't know.
I think we had to end up there because of the representation clauses about populations. It was tough to come up with this formula because if you go based on population, help me out here, guys.
Yeah. So if I think the part of the problem is if you let fill those 9 seats where one person represents each district or town, excuse me, right? That in itself, that could be okay. But when you get to those other 4 seats, right? And so the concern was from the Mount Tabor rep at the time is he didn't want Manchester, who has by far the largest population, to be able to dominate those, right? So we've said, thinking back, how do we prevent? There's this back and forth. We have these smaller towns who don't want to get muscled out. And we have the larger towns who wanted to be represented, somewhat proportionally. So the agreement was that, okay, if we create this at-large model, then so Manchester could have, 2, 3, potentially, 5, right? 5 seats. But there's a check to power there with the at-large voting system. And, if Mount Tabor, Sunderland, all these other towns didn't like to see on the ballot that all these Manchester people are running, then that most likely might not happen. Okay, and so if there were just nine seats, it would be okay to have I think one town vote on that one seat, right? But because you have to have those other 4 seats, right? We weren't comfortable in Manchester or Dorset. I don't want to speak for you guys, but I know I wasn't comfortable in Manchester just having 1 seat, given the size of the population.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so that's the. But again, the at-large voting system is the check, the balance. Right? If that makes sense.
Right. Oh, no, I totally understand that. I'm just trying to figure out how this works. So now I come up to a ballot sheet with names.
The first year is going to be really tough.
Let's say there are 3 people running for the Landgrove spot, and there are 3 people running for Manchester. And so I'm looking, going, what name do I like? Oh, I had an uncle, and he really ticked me off. So I'm going to vote. Or you could do the 2016 presidential campaign and say, I'm going to vote against everybody.
Sure. Or you can vote for just your town. It is difficult, but I think it came down to a legal call on having to do all of 13 members at large. We couldn't split it. So logically, I definitely follow you. I know logically we talked about it, and that first year would be very difficult.
One thing technically, you got to change the mindset to, at that point, it's not towns. It is one school district that encompasses all the towns. So it's actually the one school district that's doing all the voting. So to some extent, that's why everybody votes on everything, because there is only one legal entity at that point.
Right, which I understand. It's just that it's going to have to be set up so that even though we're one district, these are going to be the candidates for Dorset. These are going to be the candidates for Manchester. These are going to be, and then there would have to be separate candidates.
Vote, they are just residents of the district.
Right.
So they aren't, when they're not voting in relation to their town. They're a Dorset person could vote for nobody from Dorset and vote just for people from Manchester.
Well, completely, but because you have to have one from each, you are going to have to vote for someone. And I guess my point is...
But you don't have to vote for them. Ultimately, whoever gets the most votes from Dorset.
No, and I do understand that. It's just sort of the uninformed vote.
Weird, though.
It's the uninformed vote where people are voting for people they've never met before.
Yeah.
And
their homework.
Yeah.
And so just a little clarity on that. There's four elections a year. Okay, four seats are up every year after that first year. And those, we decided the other night, Jim brings up this, I don't know if you saw this, we decided the other night all the 4 at-large seats are going to happen in the same year. So so hopefully that would provide a little bit of clarity to the system. But again, to put Jim's point takes engagement.
Right. And I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to say something. We moved here from cities progressively smaller until we got here, but in Idaho, we were living in a city that had over 350,000 people in one school district. And all I can say to your not knowing them is hopefully because we're taking nice towns and merging them into a larger school district, people who are running for these seats will take the time to go to the towns and meet people. Because I think if we start to lose that aspect of community that we've had, we will ultimately start to see the problems that all of these large cities do have with schools that have consolidated.
That's a good point. And, we'll be a bigger district than our House representative has to do. And that was my first thought, like, have lawn signs, all over the place, for school board seats, but it's the best solution we came up with.
My question is a simple one. We have 1,700 students in the whole. Can somebody just give me a thumbnail as to, from largest to smallest, what the numbers are?
Yeah.
Manchester,
the mountain towns.
Yeah.
The students at the Floodbrook School.
What's the hierarchy in terms of quantity?
You got the ADM right there, Jim.
Thank you.
So, Manchester, roughly 600. The mountain towns, which again is 4 separate towns together, so most of those students go to Floodbrook, is 470.
These are K to 12.
Yeah. Dorset's 300. Sunderland's 150. These are a couple years old. Danby's 120. Mount Tabor's 14. And then you've got another 100 students in UD 23, which is basically high school, right? So essentially it's Manchester, the mountain towns, Dorset, Danby. Within the mountain towns, it's got to be Londonderry, Peru, my guess is Weston, Landgrove. No?
Yeah, but in reality, with the mountain towns,
So
it's sort of changed, but when they became a red, this is, kind of what we're talking about. When they became a red, they used to have a Londonderry and a Peru and a Landgrove board and all that stuff. Those are all gone now. They have one board, that covers all 4 towns. And so we're talking about doing the same thing, so to some extent, those are the numbers, but they kind of look at themselves as one.
So, not to get too theoretical, but when you're talking about wanting to have like all our kids or all our kids and it's one big district, then isn't it a little counterproductive to have a mandatory rep from each town? Because what is that person actually doing?
Interested.
Like why wouldn't you want the board just to be a board for all those towns together, thinking collectively and operating collectively and not, is that one person from each town only going to be there to say, we really do have a leaky roof, we absolutely have to fix it, you have to give us extra money this year? And then what is that person actually doing?
Yeah, well, they'll have a full, board seat. You might be
with that whole collective idea, isn't it?
I think it's a legal requirement, Jim, isn't it? That every town in the district has to have a board seat.
But those kinds of questions are not brought up by an individual school board member. They're prioritized through the supervisory union right now. The supervisory union is the one that prioritizes things like that and brings them to us as part of our budget. So an individual rep from Dorset wouldn't say, this whole wall is rotting out from poor drainage. That would be something the principal would bring to the superintendent. They would work on it in a budgetarily, and then that would come in a list of priorities to the full board.
That's a good point.
Basically,
Right.
that works now.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, what John was saying, all our kids are all our kids. It's the Dorset, the one rep from Mount Tabor isn't there just to look out for Mount Tabor. There to look out for the education of all the kids in the overall district.
But the reality is they'd still be living in that town, and yes, certainly they're going to hear back from for
Their
more of those
constituents,
community
yeah.
members. I think that's, that's fair to say that they, will maybe have, more of a voice from the town that they live in, but they're by definition supposed to be operating for the entire district. Making decisions that are best for the whole district.
Okay. I mean, I think it makes, in my point of view, it makes sense, because even though it's one district, you still have all these different operations, and each one is going to have different issues. And so it's good to have someone that's more familiar with that to represent them on the board.
But Jen made the point that all that operational stuff is already kind of channeled through more pragmatic
No,
channels.
but well, you've still got teachers and
Right.
you've got actual, day stuff, education, what you think is
Right.
happening that you might want to be discussing rather than, just necessarily budgetary issues, although
Yeah.
that would be part of it too.
If people need to leave, feel free. Thank you for coming. But you brought up something that we've started talking about at the Dorset Parent Volunteers meeting a year ago. If this moves forward, what's the voice of, the Dorset family is going to be? And I think it's a good time to start examining that. Will it be a formal part of a future school board? No, I don't think it would be. But, how can the individual communities still maintain individuality, within the context of a big, broader district, and raising issues that, they might feel are important, just as maybe an individual family does now within the Dorset School Board setting. Does that make sense? That I think it's good to question that and to start thinking down the road, how do the individual towns, continue to have a voice, within the operations of the school?
I don't really see how it's going to be both. Like if you have a board that's trying to collectively solve problems for everybody,
Yeah.
then it's not just about salaries, and it's not just about how many special ed kids have a certain person, or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
It can't maintain too much individuality, because say Dorset wants Circus Marcus to come
Right.
for a certain thing,
Right.
then everyone else is going to say, well, then we would like that too, but you only have one spring vacation or something. I mean, I
Right.
don't know. I don't really see how it's going to I don't see how it's going to maintain both individuality and all our kids are all our kids. Like,
I think this comes down to a governance versus management conversation, and that the board is a governance body. It's not a management body. The supervisory union is the management body. So while this board has jurisdiction over certain topics, they're governance topics. They're not necessarily the management topics that the SU runs right now. I don't think those waters are intended to be muddied by the structure. I think it will remain a governance body, and it's a very distinctive role. I mean, from management, and every time we've creeped into a management conversation at our board, we get pushed right back, like, this isn't your role. Your role is these broader stroke, policy-oriented, decision-making roles, and the supervisory union, they're the ones, those employees in consultation with the principals are making those other more boots-on-the-ground decisions. So I wouldn't just keep those boundaries in line, because I think it's really easy to become frightened about all the loss of control, but really, I don't think it changes very much for us in a lot of ways, because we're already so centralized. The thing that goes away are our individual school boards more than anything else. And right now, when we talk about cost savings, if I recall the last estimate we received, the SU spends 50% of their time managing school boards. So if we go from 9, or whatever number we're talking about, down to 1, that's a ton of personnel hours and capacity that becomes freed up theoretically. Also, not selling this, because it's been hard for me too, but I don't want people to become fearful that somehow this board is going to be running our school. They're not. It's going to be very much like it is right now.
There's one thing that I think has kind of been interesting when we were looking at this. Took a look at Massachusetts. Massachusetts did a big consolidation where they really created some very big school districts. And as a part of that, actually, the legislator mandated that each town have essentially, and this is, each town would have to have a board unto itself that doesn't have a governance role, but it has, you have to have a board that essentially is people from your town who represent your town and its interests, get together, discuss things, and, they don't have any power, but they do have the ability to reflect to the board or whoever else, what their issues and what their needs and wants are and stuff like that, and to work with the principal and try to, come up with ideas. We, not saying that that's the structure that makes sense or the way to go, but, that's the way, one state decided to go. It's an interesting idea, and I think the key there is that we actually should be thinking forward about how do we ensure that we continue to have a voice at the town level. And I think there are ways to do that. That's one way they did it there. Maybe we can come up with a better idea. Right? I don't know, but I think it is important for us to continue to think about, how we're going to continue to have. I think the school benefits greatly when there are interested people within the town interested about what's happening with the school. So we don't want to lose that. So we need to figure out a way to maintain that.
I think an important follow-up on that is keeping the integration of at least maybe one question that I didn't ask, but it's down the line, is in terms of like the formal town meeting structure and how it always used to be that way. Well, what about the concept of keeping it somewhat that way in terms of maybe there's a staff representation specific to the town's school that, okay, this is what's going on at the school in this particular year, versus where that's gone from the town meeting process. And then I think you start to lose those ties. Good.
Thank you all for coming. Feel free to reach out to us. We're here now, obviously. We have contact information that's on posters in the community.
Are you going to put this up on North Carolina Murder Study Committee website?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys.
Thank you.